Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to the Public Select Board Select meeting. Welcome to the meeting. The first item on the agenda is the election of chair. Are there any nominations?
Nominate Councillor Grocott, please.
Lovely, thank you. So nomination of Councillor Grocott and seconded by Councillor Blakeborough.
Thank you, colleagues. We are being live streamed, so it would be useful just to introduce ourselves for the thousands that are watching. My name is Martin Grocott. I'm member for Lansdowne Ward in Abergavenny, and as you may have seen, I've just been chosen to chair this morning's meeting.
Good morning, Wendy Barnard, Democratic Services.
Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Governance.
Hazel Clatworthy, Sustainability Policy Officer.
Richard Jones, Performance Manager.
Debbie Blakeborough from the Trellick United Ward.
Thank you. Jamie Trehan, Overmont Ward, Monmouth.
Good morning, I'm Sharon Knight. I'm the Communities and Partnerships Development Manager for Monmouthshire Council.
Okay, if we can turn to today's agenda then. We've gone through agenda item 1, which was the election of a chair for this morning. So item 2 is apologies for absence.
Yes, apologies for absence have been received from Councillors Feakin, Batruni and Taylor.
Item 3 is declarations of interest. I shouldn't imagine that'll be particularly pertinent this morning, but if anything does crop up, got to just ask you make a declaration at that moment. We have no members of the public here, so there is no public open forum. So if we can move to agenda item 5, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Trehan, you were present at the last meeting, weren't you?
I was not, no.
Right, well, that means I was the only committee member that was present. My recollection is that it is an extremely accurate record, and I move that they are accepted. Items arising from those minutes, I went through and I could see nothing that's arising. Colleagues, anything that you saw there that you would like further detail on from our officers? Okay, well, if we can move on at some speed here now. We're on the second half of the agenda after about 30 seconds. Item 6, which is the regional wellbeing work, and I can recollect at the last meeting there was discussion about the extent to which the Monmouthshire Public Service Board should work in collaboration with and support for other South East Wales public service boards. So who's going to take us through that one? Okay, over to you, thanks.
Thank you for that, Chair, and thank you for the introduction. As you mentioned, this is one of the ways in which Monmouthshire Public Service Board works with the other 4 public service boards in Gwent, and the paper is provide you an update on work that's taking place, and to use that to inform your understanding of the work so far by Monmouthshire Public Service Board in collaboration. So the report sets out the work that's mainly been achieved through the work of the Gwent-wide Strategic Wellbeing Assessment Group, which consists of representatives of 5 public service boards in Gwent. And they have utilised, we have utilised funding available from Welsh Government for the year to undertake 2 main projects in identified areas where it be further enhance and develop work undertaken in the wellbeing assessment, and also then work to inform the wellbeing plan and future development of the wellbeing plan. So there's obviously strong links with this work with the next agenda item on the committee's work this morning. So the 2 main areas of focus for the regional work in have been around measuring better measurement of local well-being, and the second piece has been around future trends, which has been a common area identified by the Future Generations Commissioner in her feedback to PSBs across Wales. So I'll run you through briefly the progress so far with those two pieces of work. The first one is using the Happy Communities set of tools, and 5 PSBs across Gwent jointly agreed to use these tools to provide two main insights. One was around a better understanding of well-being at a local level through a survey, and the second has been using what's called a Happy Communities Index to get a greater insight around the conditions for well-being in Monmouthshire in particular. So the index has been developed collaboratively with the Gwent PSBs. It's also now been taken forward by Data Cymru, using the work that has been undertaken in Gwent and involving the Gwent PSBs, and that has now been published as what's called the Thriving Places Wales Index, and that index draws together a range of different indicators related to well-being. It categorises them in 3 domains. The first domain is around local conditions, and that covers place and environment, mental and physical health, education, work and learning, and people and community. So those are subdomains of that domain. It also covers domains around sustainability and equality. So that work has now been published across all 22 local authority areas, and obviously be then used to inform a greater understanding about wellbeing in Monmouthshire. The second part of those tools is the Happiness Pulse, which was undertaken, and committee may recall this back in January and February time, a significant effort across all public services to complete the Happiness Pulse, using a variety of methods to engage with communities, and the pulse is about measurement of individual well-being in Monmouthshire. So it allows residents to complete a survey. They get a score around Be Do Connect, as it's called in the survey, so that better understands their own well-being, and also then provides some advice to them on their own how they can improve their own well-being. And also then for the Public Service Board, it'll provide a greater understanding about individuals' well-being, and also possibly allow us to interrogate more what that means at a local level. So following that extensive engagement, which was undertaken with a range of events, and we tried to engage with a broader demographic as we could to make sure the results were representative. We received a really positive response rate. Over 1,000 residents and nearly 500 Monmouthshire staff completed the survey. And that was one of the highest response rates across Gwent. We're currently awaiting for Happy Cities who host the survey to provide us with further analysis of that, so we can use that then to better understand wellbeing in Monmouthshire, and we'll sit that alongside the evidence from the Thriving Places Index, so that gives us an even broader picture, and that's how the PSB then will help use that in terms of developing its action plan. So that's the progress with the Happy Community set of tools. The second fundamental piece of work was around future trends. So this was undertaken with involvement again of the Gwent group, and the work has been completed in 2 main parts. The first part provides information on horizon scans. So these are identify strategically important trends, potential disruptors and drivers of change, and provide a range of evidence on these issues. So at I won't go through them in detail, but point 4.12 provides you with a range of sort of broad themes that covers. And the second part of that work has been around scenarios. So scenarios is a way of basically allowing us to then use the information that's gathered from the horizon scans to start to think about what that would mean in terms of decisions in Gwent, and also then decisions in Monmouthshire in particular for us. And those trends look at national trends, they look at global trends, and they also look at then translating those into what that means more local areas in Gwent, and potentially then in Monmouthshire as well. So following the outputs of that piece of work, it's now about considering how we can then use and inform the work coming out of that to shape the wellbeing plan, as I said earlier, linking to then the action plan we're developing as a PSB, how that information then can help shape and make sure we're taking account of those future trends in our actions, which is obviously a fundamental piece of the Future Generations Act legislation. So that's a roundup of the 2 main pieces of work. Just briefly to update the committee on future work. There is work ongoing still at Gwent level, which I know you've updated on before, around collaborating around complex issues and some common themes that have come out of work from the wellbeing assessments across Gwent, and that continues to be addressed by the Gwent-wide group. And there is additional funding being made available for Welsh Government to work again on a Gwent-wide footprint to further enhance our understanding of wellbeing assessment and plans. And the Gwent-wide group are currently scoping up projects in which to best utilise that funding for the current year in 2018-19. So hopefully that gives you a bit of background in terms of what we've worked on collaboratively so far, the outputs of that, and then some insight in terms of how that work has started to be used and will be used in more detail in future to inform the wellbeing plan and future iterations of it. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Jones. Councillor Blakeborough.
Thanks for this. So yeah, testing our happiness levels. You've started to answer some of my sort of queries about what are you actually testing when you're testing happiness, because happiness can be time specific. So I might be happy now, but in 10 minutes I might not be for whatever reason. So you start answering, but I'd like a little bit more kind of information on how that is tested. Looking at 4.9, in Monmouthshire, a total of 1,178 residents and 462 Monmouthshire County Councils County Council staff responded. I'd like to know, when putting out this research, what percentage of the Monmouthshire population have actually responded. So I'd like to know what that percentage is, and is it enough to give us a real good understanding of the happiness levels and what the issues out there are, because obviously that information informs our practice in the future. So yes, sort of something around that. I think we're looking for results in the future, but it would be interesting to know how we compare to other authorities in Wales as how happy we are. I know in Monmouthshire we drink more units of alcohol than any other authority, so maybe we are quite a happy authority. I don't know. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'll try and take them in order, but I'll probably flip between the three questions. So in terms of measurement of happiness, I think the tool is called Happiness Pulse, but actually it's the measurement around well-being. So it's about a greater understanding about those conditions for well-being, and the survey has been designed based on a variety of research to look at particular factors that have a greater influence on individuals' well-being. Not necessarily, obviously that can lead to happiness, but I think that the framing of happiness probably slightly masks it. It's more broadly around those elements of well-being. As I mentioned, the tool covers sort of broader range of Be, Do, Connect, and having completed the survey myself, there's a range of questions in there that cover those factors. So there's sort of interactions with the community, physical activity levels, engagement in things like charity work. So the questions are quite broad and cover a range of things to try and give it a true reflection. Obviously, your point is right that one day or from 10 minutes to next that happiness or feelings of well-being can change, and we're conscious that obviously that survey is a snapshot in time. It's undertaken in January, February. We did it around a Beat in the Blues was the border sort of highlight event, traditionally a time of year when post-Christmas, etc., well-being may not be as high. So I think it's about when we're using those results to take account of that and understand it, and then look at potentially what in future we could do to try and maybe get that broad understanding at all various times of the year and all various points. So I think it's taking consideration of those points when we analyse it. In terms of the response rate,
I've just done a sum based on population and the number of...
beating me to it. I've done the maths already. I was going to say around 1%, but Hazel's telling me it's 1.28% of the population who have responded. So very...
Not including the staff.
Not including staff. So very specific. Obviously, I think for the effort that's gone in to get over 1,000 responses is really positive. We have to be mindful of the response rate, as I say, around 1% of the population. Obviously, that work has been done across the 5 public service board areas in Gwent. So that'll understand how our response rate compares to others. Obviously, each council area staff have also completed it. Not all staff will live necessarily within the Monmouthshire area, so we'll look to with happy communities how we can then apportion those responses back to each local authority area. So that may increase our rate in terms of Monmouthshire slightly. But again, it's one of the tools that will give us a better understanding of individual well-being, and we've got to consider it in light of that response rate we receive. I think, over 1,000 responses is really positive for the effort we put in, but 1%, it's got to be proportionate to how we respond. And then that bit around comparing, obviously the Thriving Places Index now will allow us to compare across 22 local authority areas in Wales. When we have the fuller analysis results for Gwent areas for the Happiness Pulse, we'll be able to compare ourselves with Gwent colleagues, and we'll also look to then, where possible, obviously the tool isn't just been undertaken in Wales, it's been undertaken in different places in England, so we'll look at potential opportunities there to allow us to compare with more similar areas to Monmouthshire in terms of things like demographic, geography, etc., where possible. I can't promise exactly how much we'll be able to do that yet, but we know that's something we're keen to explore now in analysing the results, is that broader comparison, but we're not quite sure exactly how much we'll be able to do that, but we certainly should be able to do it across Gwent, and we can do it across the 22 areas in Wales. But the index part of it in Wales is slightly different to the index in England, because some of the indicators are different to reflect the Welsh context and availability of data within Wales. So there's obviously differences there as well in terms of direct comparability. But hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, a follow-up, Councillor. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely no problem.
So 1%. Because we don't want to be just tokenistic on this, it's got to be real and useful and valuable. So in terms of getting the research, has everything been online? Because obviously there's a huge group of people who will not fill these things online. Has it been anonymous people filling in, or has there been, people walking through the streets of Monmouth, stopping people saying, do you live here, can I fill this in with you? So it's more kind of proactive in getting out there and getting people's responses. I'm interested to know what the gender, the demographics of those who have responded, the age ranges, those kind of things. And also, if we are doing this happiness test as a baseline, I'm interested in terms of, are we looking, for example, we ask Mrs. Jones now, how happy are you? And then we ask Mrs. Jones the question 2 years' time to see if our practice change, our input has made a difference to her life, or is it just scattergun? Do you know what I mean?
In terms of the way in which the survey was available, we worked really hard to make sure it was available in a range of formats. So it was available online. There's a significant amount of social media push for it to be completed, but we're also conscious that we wanted to go to groups where attend existing groups, which would allow us to capture a broad range of demographics. So in the report I highlight, we went to sort of the Engage to Change group, the Youth Forum, the Access for All Forum, Action 50+, and actually sat down with people with tablets to help them fill in the surveys for them. We also had paper copies available in all our community hubs, and our community hubs are really hard and really achieved a really great amount of responses through paper surveys, so people felt more comfortable who filling them in with paper could fill them in. So we worked really hard to try and make sure we're covering a broader demographic as possible and make it as accessible as possible within the resources we had available to everyone in Monmouthshire, which I think is probably reflective of the response rate, albeit, as we say, it's only around 1%. In terms of, so just pick up your second question there. So in terms of that's the response rate, maybe the second point around the way you're measuring over time.
Random selection of people, and so when you then do the research again and say 2 years time, it could be a totally different group of people.
Yeah.
There isn't any.
Yeah. It's not necessarily. No, it's not. We wouldn't be able to track responses from an individual over time. So it's just. I think what we're looking at as public service is obviously our work will impact on a variety of individuals and communities. It's about having that broad understanding and sitting that alongside the range of other information which we gather, whether that be through the range of information, the wellbeing assessment. We've obviously got the Thriving Places Index tool and a variety of other data and information we're collecting. So it's about that broader understanding of wellbeing. People may not in their lives necessarily be touched by interaction from the Public Service Board directly. So it's that touch point that allows us a broader understanding, but we have to consider it as one of the mechanisms which we will use and not the sole mechanism we will use to understand wellbeing in those areas.
Yeah, and it was just on that point of tracking individuals. This doesn't purport to track the well-being of individuals. So if you look at work that colleagues in social care are doing at the moment, for example, it's measuring individual well-being and tracking a distance travelled over time. This doesn't purport to do the same thing as that. This is about a much broader measure of well-being, and it's more akin to, a Mori poll before an election to a certain extent. You're taking a barometer at a certain point in time. So I recognise you.
Just on that point, and we know the results of the Mori polls because they always get it wrong, so got to be careful.
Yeah, another thing is, actually, you may think, well, 1.28 or 1.5 if you exclude children feels small. And actually, in statistical sampling, the larger your population, effectively, a smaller percentage sample size you need to have for that to have a reasonable confidence interval. So yes, the larger the sample size, the smaller the margin of error. And I don't have the sort of the data calculation in front of me, but with a population of 78,000 adults and with staff included as well, 1,600 responses, would have a confidence interval of, top of my head, say it was 5 or 6%. So you would actually say, if you get a result that says 90%, it could be 96, it could be 84. There is that variation within it. So to be confident of an increase in result, measuring one year and another, you'd need an increase that also takes into account the margin of error. And that's what you look to do with a sampling size, is look at a confidence interval. We accept that the only way to get a 100% confidence interval is to survey every single member of the population. And clearly, no exercise that I'm aware of does that. Perhaps not even the census manages that. But what we've supplied is that sort of baseline measure, but also to keep it proportionate within the resources that we have available. So clearly, we could spend time on street corners, we could leaflet drop every house, but that would push up the costs beyond that which were feasible and affordable to us, and which we feel would deliver sufficient value weighed up against the other things we could be spending money on.
Ms. Clatworthy, you still want to come in? Thanks.
Just to give a bit more, you asked about the demographics. A colleague in the office who kind of led on this bit of work, 2/3 of the responses were from females. But there was a good spread across the age groups. 22 under 16, 65, 16 to 24-year-olds, 118, 25 to 34-year-olds, 369, 35 to 49-year-olds, 399, 50 to 64-year-olds, and 153, 65 to 74-year-olds, and 50 over 75s. So it was a good spread across the age ranges.
Thanks for that. That's interesting. I've got a question that's going to take me some time to get it out of my head, for which I apologise, and I hope I can actually get it across succinctly. We've got our Monmouthshire Public Service Board with its priorities that are now published and up and running. There is parallel with that the report that you've brought to us this morning, Mr. Jones, which is talking about South East Wales collaboration. Now, this is the bit that I'm slightly concerned about. In the Monmouthshire PSB priorities, the first one, which is most pertinent to the committee that I chair, is the one about children getting the best possible start in life. And I would have thought a very important player there was the EAS, which covers South East Wales. In other words, our Monmouthshire PSB is pulling in regional players who will be able to contribute. We've then got a developing South East Wales organisation. How are we going to make sure that the key players are still involved at a South East Wales level through that newer organisation, while at the same time playing a full part in our Monmouthshire PSB priorities? You see where I'm coming from? Just the risks of a South East Wales conglomerate taking one of our key priorities and potentially fudging it a little.
Yeah, if I can just pick that one up, Chair, and I think you're absolutely right to highlight some of the concerns as we move forward with regionalisation agendas, that sometimes the difference between regional footprints there'll be variety between different projects. I think we take the view that the partners it's right to collaborate with on different projects won't be consistent, so one footprint wouldn't necessarily suit every single collaboration. So we have the city deal across 10 local authorities, we have the EAS across 5. I think with this PSB, what we do is look to sort of draw the distinction between the core business of the Children and Young People's Directorate, doing the things which Will McLean oversees and which you oversee as Children and Young People's Select Committee, and those additional responsibilities or those additional things that we've identified across the partnerships, which we don't feel would necessarily be addressed by conventional means or by one partner acting in isolation. So there is that difference in focus between the EAS and their work on school standards and school improvements, and some of the issues we see here in terms of giving children the best possible starting life, which in many cases, some of the evidence coming forward was beyond the sphere of academia. So some of the evidence we looked at in the wellbeing assessment, for example, spoke about what happens outside the school gate and its impact on educational attainment. I'm certainly not an educationist, and nor would I purport to be. But one of the things I'm aware that studies have found is that actually, and this is not Monmouthshire studies, but that children from different backgrounds tend to sort of move ahead in a sort of broadly consistent pattern during the school term, but can actually fall back in terms of what happens outside the school gate, over school holidays when measurements have been done in international studies. So it's about understanding that sort of broader offer through the Public Service Board. The EAS and our colleagues in CYP have that focus on school standards. What the PSB is looking to do in terms of that focus on the best possible start in life is look at some of that preschool work, which Sharon and her colleagues deal with the partnerships like Families First and that early support work, but also that focus on the rounded well-being of a child beyond the school gate. So I think absolutely right. It's a very good point, and we need to keep that distinction that we're working with the EAS at times on different issues to those which the Public Service Board are addressing.
Thank you for that. I wonder if I could just carry on similar lines. Mr. Jones, I guess this is probably in your area. I've spoken elsewhere within the council about my own personal support for the idea of moving towards fewer authorities in Wales and in a sense almost moving towards recreating the former South East Wales county of Gwent. Now, some colleagues of mine suggested I did that purely for political reasons so that there might be a different party in control. It was pointed out to me that, in fact, if we did that, the three current counties that are for amalgamation, including Monmouthshire, the independents would control that. Councillor Blakeburn probably has just dramatically increased her support for that. So it's not in any sense a political belief that I've got, but I do, as an ex-senior officer of the county of Gwent, believe that we lost an awful lot when we broke into 5 small authorities. Is there much of a political will in this regionalisation that you've seen from talking at a more regional level? And is Monmouthshire, where do we stand in terms of supporting regionalisation within PSB? Do other local authorities like Newport, for example, have the enthusiasm that we seem to have for PSB at a regional level?
What I can reflect on is probably more an officer level working group was formed around the Gwent Strategic Wellbeing Assessment Group that obviously we have achieved in terms of development wellbeing assessment, and through the work I've outlined this morning we are achieving collectively utilising Welsh Government funding on a collective footprint to enhance our understanding of wellbeing in Monmouthshire and further develop our assessment and plans. In terms of then, obviously that group is functioning to achieve that. In terms of the wider questions around the appetite for it, I don't think I'd probably be best placed to answer that for you this morning. I don't know whether colleagues would be or be able to offer a view, but I don't think I can probably provide any more than that.
I think you might get a United Nations prize for that answer. I just wondered if you got a feel for it. I realise that I'm not asking you to put your head on the block, but thanks for that. Councillor Blakebury, yeah.
I guess this is an observation and maybe a suggestion. I'm hopping back again to the number of results with the surveys, and I do realise that there is limited resources, and I just wondered if it was an opportunity lost here. I was at the intergeneration conference, and I met an engagement officer from Gwent Police. They have to do surveys regularly, and she said on her own she cannot do them. So she basically teaches the police cadets. So they go out with their surveys, and says you can get, in a couple of hours, a couple of hundred done, because you've got about 10 cadets out there, and it's really good for them, and also getting that information. Whether we could have sort of spoken to the sixth form students at the 4 secondary schools, using it as part of their Welsh back, because there's a lot to be learnt from there, so it's good for their skills, and it could have helped us whether we could have done something like that, a bit more kind of imaginative and going sort of beyond the normal resources. Obviously it's probably too late now, but to take that on board in the future.
Thank you for the suggestions. I think there's obviously under the Public Service Board wider partnership, there's a engagement and participation group which features all the partners of the PSB, and we keen to it, and they were an integral part of the work undertaken on the survey. For example, part of the work was looking at how we could survey Coleg Gwent students, looking at sort of sixth form and post-16 education areas, but I think some of the feedback in terms of how we could in future even further enhance how we can involve other people. I say a lot of work was undertaken with colleagues to try and, in the time we had and resource, we had maximise the availability of the survey and uptake of the survey, but some good further suggestions there for any future work for us to take on board, and for that group in particular to look to maximise the opportunities available. Yeah.
Okay, before we move on, I think it's probably worth noting that we welcome the Welsh Government's grant to enable this collaborative work to proceed. £74,000 and 26 pence. I would ask you take great care on spending the 26 pence. If we could move on, and thank you very much for bringing us that report, Mr. Jones, and I'm sorry if I felt I was putting you on the spot. It wasn't my intention at all. If we could move on to agenda item 7. Mr. Gatehouse has in the past talked about how we've moved from the planning into the implementation now, and so this is a pertinent report to bring to us, I think, the Wellbeing Plan, Emerging Priorities and Actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I would say it's a tentative step towards implementation. I wouldn't want to oversell or claim that we're further forward than we are at the moment. But just to give you a bit of a sort of reminder in terms of context, I'm aware that as a committee you meet only once every 3 months. So just to sort of play out a little bit of what for us at times can feel like ancient history. So we've completed the wellbeing assessment. Earlier in the year, the Public Service Board signed off the Wellbeing Plan, which set out 4 objectives and 19 what are termed within the guidance that underpins this Act, steps. And steps is quite an interesting choice of words because it's consciously not using the word actions, which most of us would think of. And I think that is probably a very conscious choice in terms of the complexity of the issues you're dealing with. Because once you use the word action, you are starting to think you know exactly what you're going to do. We're taught that action should be very specific. Action should be measurable. Action should be time-bound. Yet the sorts of things we're dealing with that arose in this well-being assessment are in the world of complex and complicated problems. The sorts of things that we have to admit we don't necessarily know the answers to. So we've moved towards a phase for each of these 19 steps of sort of exploration and starting to create a sense of purpose and vision around the sorts of things we could be achieving if we move forward with them. So what you see in this report is quite light touch detail at this stage. What's happened is each of the partners has taken responsibility for one of those steps. Some partners have taken responsibility for more than one of the steps, and as you look down to the document, you'll see Monmouthshire County Council. We're here talking about the PSB, but with my Monmouthshire County Council hat on, we have a number of these steps that we are working on. The partners have gone away. They've been talking to experts in their field. They've been getting together and having meetings with practitioners and putting together that sense of what it is we could achieve in this space, what it could take, and what are the likely timescales. If we move forward with this, what are the likely timescales at which we could start to see impact at a community level? And what we're moving towards then is the Public Service Board undertaking, I mean, these are all important, so I hate to use the word prioritisation. We're really more talking about sequencing. Which of these does it make sense to start first? Which of these could be delivered quickly? Which of these do we need to put an initial spade in the ground now to perhaps be seeing results in 15 or 20 years' time? If we were to look, for example, at the issue of adverse childhood experiences, the impact that children exposed to alcohol abuse or domestic violence, the impact that has on their life chances, we know that work we start now is not necessarily going to lead to a change in measurable outcomes for those individuals that we can sort of clearly see for many, many years to come. Of course, every intervention has a positive impact in the here and now. You will improve someone's life in the moment, in the weeks to come by a positive intervention. Yet it's only really in the medium to long term when we understand at a community or societal level whether an intervention has made a substantial difference to the well-being of the population of children in Monmouthshire as a whole. And so I don't want to position this as an overly simplistic piece, something that we can say that perhaps other select committees would be used to dealing with, where we bring to you a measures report and you can track things quarter by quarter. Have rent arrears not rent arrears. We're not. Have council tax arrears gone up or down in the last quarter? These are not that sort of solution. So if I just sort of draw your attention to sort of some of the detail here, which is in Appendix 1, page 14 of the bundle, what you'll see is a repetition of some headings. So what's the objective? We've got 4 objectives, providing children and people with the best possible start in life, as mentioned, dealing with the challenges associated with demographic change. Under each of those are 4 or 5 steps. So the next heading you see, if you look at the first page of Appendix 2, is the step. What is it we're actually think we can move towards that will help resolve that objective? You then see led by, that's the partner of the Public Service Board that's assumed responsibility for this piece of work. And those partners may well change as the work develops. It might be that one partner's right to lead it in phase 1 or through the exploration stage, perhaps because they have the resource or expertise, but as we move towards more implementation, that may pass to another partner. You then see the vision or ambition. Now, this hasn't been approved or endorsed anywhere, so you're seeing this to scrutinise something very early on. This was brought back to a meeting called the Programme Board, which is the level below the Public Service Board. So just to set that in our mind, the Public Service Board is chaired by Paul Matthews. It has on it the Chief Execs, and Peter Fox, Councillor Peter Fox attends. The Programme Board, to give you a sense of level, the Monmouthshire officers on that are Will McLean, Claire Marchant, Kelly Byrne, obviously in shortly only one of those as their replacements step in. that's the level we're talking at. So the initial work done by partners was brought back to that programme board, and we dedicated a day's workshop to working through this detail to try and shape it up. But it is still in an evolving stage. So you see there the vision or ambition that was informed by that discussion, and that's a sense of where we're going. And you'll see different levels, because these are produced by different people. You'll see different levels of detail, different use of language. We haven't cleansed this or tried to make it uniform in any way. This really is the work of individual partners. And then you see a time scale. I mean, the first one, perhaps harder to get your head around, is short, medium and long term. But I think this is adverse childhood experiences, and it's reflecting, as I mentioned earlier, there will be short-term benefits for individuals, individual households, but really the true impact is not until the long term. Others you see here will have a sort of fairly short-term measurable output. But so what you're trying to do is just give you that overview of these objectives. What you don't have is all 19 of the steps. And the reality is that not all partners have been able to complete all 19 of these steps. So there is still some outstanding work here. And I'll just highlight a couple of them so you don't feel I'm sort of brushing them under the carpet. But largely the reasons being we're looking at the work on around ensuring we get the best possible value out of the city deal. And of course, as we know, our Deputy Chief Executive is transitioning from this organisation to her new role on that city deal. So we know it's very much front and centre. It's happening, but we don't yet have the clarity on exactly what that means in terms of individual steps for our own organisation at the moment. There's an activity on renewable energy, which colleagues at Natural Resources Wales are working up. You know, we know as a local authority we have a strong commitment to that through the work that's happening to pilot hydrogen power cars in Abergavenny with River Simple, which has attracted headlines, through to our own solar farm. So what I don't really think is because things are not necessarily here, there is not activity happening, but the detail hasn't been shaped up to an adequate level where we feel it would be right to put it before you as members of this committee. So we have some detail in there, and I guess the questions for you to consider with the chair's permission are sort of broadly looking at these, having previously had sight of the wellbeing assessment and having a good understanding of Monmouthshire as a county and the communities you represent. Are the things you've seen here the right things for us to be doing to deliver and move towards the 4 objectives in the wellbeing plan? Are there things which you as individuals or as a committee have seen that you feel actually they're missing a trick if they don't consider that? Things that could go forward to the PSB alongside what is here as recommendations of the committee, which could be further explored or looked at. Because all of us see and read different things. We all get exposed to different ideas. And it might be that the partner leading on this particular objective hasn't seen some of the research or some of the ideas or some of the interesting practice that you have seen. And thirdly, if there are any of these steps, of course, before you today are officers of the council, the PSB is multifaceted with many partners. If you want to explore any of these in future, there could be items that you wish to add to a future work programme and invite one of the partners to attend to explore in more detail the issue or behind this ambition and actually scrutinise some of the partner bodies. And that's something that will remain open over the next 2, 3, 4 years, because this is an ongoing programme of work, and it's something for you to consider as a committee is which of these do we want to look at as a priority, and which of these might we want to look at perhaps in 18 months' time when we feel there's a few more miles on the clock of the project. So, Chair, with your permission, it's sort of open to discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gatehouse. I wonder if you could just give a little further clarification for me, because I was going to ask you about our powers as a committee to invite partners from the PS board to come and answer questions here. Those partner organisations within themselves, do they have equivalents of scrutiny committees, or are we the only organisation scrutinising the whole of the PSB organisation?
No, that power falls to yourself. So within the statutory guidance that underpins this Act, it makes the local authority responsible for the oversight and governance of the Public Service Board. So as a committee, your powers as such enable you to scrutinise the entirety of the work of the committee. I can't recall the precise wording. I don't believe you don't have the powers to compel partners to attend, but we're actually in the spirit of partnership working. And other than logistics, I think all of the partners of the PSB, it's been set out that they can expect as bodies and members of the Public Service Board to be called to be scrutinised on their contribution to the PSB at some stage in any given year.
Thank you for that. So, no pressure there then, colleagues. Make sure that they're doing a good job. Councillor Blake.
I'm not sure if this is the right place to bring this up, but when I read all three of the reports, the absence of this made me really concerned. So for me, it's the Cinderella of the story, integrated public transport system. So I guess when I look at those priorities, a really good quality integrated public transport system will help address many of these priorities, most certainly in terms of, I've lost my priorities now. Oh, I just had them. Wait a minute, let me have a look. 4.2. So, well, provide children and young people best possible start in life. Well, in rural areas, if they could get into towns and into school easily, obviously that's important. And we have had problems with our school transport system. Respond to the challenges associated with demographic change. We're getting older people who aren't able to drive, and they're going to be isolated and lonely if they can't get into towns. Protect and enhance the resilience of our natural environment. Well, definitely, if we can have less cars on the road, more public transport, that's got to be good for the environment. And develop opportunities for communities and businesses to be part of an economically thriving and well-connected county. So it's something that it's kind of like it's served as a side dish. And it's really part of, if you like, the meat and two veg. If we don't have an integrated public transport system, I think all else will fail. I think it's a real important part of the Health and Wellbeing Act. It's all part of the city deal. Yeah, I know within Monmouthshire there's just slow erosion of public transport. So I guess in terms of the steps, for me, what is the next step of an integrated public transport system within Monmouthshire? What's the strategy, if you like, of ensuring that this is an integral part of what we're doing here? And what's the relationship with the Monmouthshire Strategic Transport Committee? I do attend that. And I think a lot of good stuff comes from that, but it's never mentioned anywhere else. It's like, oh, don't mention public transport, too big of an issue. And as we speak, there are petitions going around, particularly in the Monmouth area, because we are looking to remove a bus service. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. You're absolutely right. Through the wellbeing assessment, transport, and particularly rural transport, was one of the things that got consistently raised across all age bands. Be that older people who can't access a bus stop to get into town or get to the GP, or younger people who are living in villages and smaller settlements who can't access training or the employment market. If they're in school, and I leave the school buses issue aside, we have a statutory duty to put to get them to school. If they're 21 and they're trying to get on a training course, to enhance their own prospects off their own back once they've left statutory education. That responsibility isn't there. It is a major challenge for us, and it's so important. There are two pieces of work, two steps within this linked into transport. One of which is developing technological solutions to rural transport, and the other is promotive, active, and sustainable travel. The activity happening at the moment. We have a piece of work which I know there's been a member briefing on, but for the benefit of those watching the stream, Monmouthshire County Council submitted a bid to the Cabinet Office Government Digital Service to create a challenge fund to invite private sector companies in to solve problems of loneliness and rural transport. One of the reasons we move forward in that way is we recognise that we're operating in a world of decreasing budgets, and that traditional transport services to date have not adequately met the needs of populations, otherwise this wouldn't have come up. But not only are the current ways of doing things not meeting those needs, they're also being put under the same cost pressures as other public services. So this pot of funding is very specific. It has to be around technical solutions. If we didn't spend it on that, it's not a case we had the option to use it to subsidise bus routes. It would just be spent in Glasgow or Edinburgh or Manchester. This was our opportunity to use that funding within Monmouthshire. So we have a potential pot of £1.25 million on the table, all of which has been provided by central government. None of that is money that's been taken away from any other service in Monmouthshire. And we're launching a competition to invite potential companies to come in and develop solutions which will connect up communities. Now, it's very hard. I'm naturally drawn to solutions, and I have all of these ideas going around in my head about how that could work. We're not allowed to do that with this thing. It's so hard not to put your own ideas, your own dreams and aspirations in these things. Our job is to put out the challenge and get people in. So one of these steps is to take those challenges, and the other thing we've done with this, thinking about your point, Councillor Breakborough, of regional transport, we've also taken this through the Cardiff Capital Region. There's a group looking at data, which is chaired by Alison Ward, the Chief Exec of Torfaen Council. And I sit on that group. So what we are hoping, that our best case scenario, one of these companies comes in, they pilot something using a small pot of money, it works at a small scale, or they can put in sufficient sort of research and development to demonstrate we think that could work in rural communities in Monmouthshire. That could make a real difference to connecting people, making them less lonely and getting them into jobs. We could give them a further £500,000 of funding to turn that into a viable, workable product. Now, if that is proven to work in Monmouthshire, what we would be looking to do then is to take that to scale across the city deal. It wouldn't be easy. We wouldn't have the money to do that. So at that point, we'd be looking to putting a bid in to the cabinet of the Cardiff Capital Region city deal to say we think this could be something that would sit alongside and complement the metro. Because one thing we know about the South Wales Metro, it will significantly enhance connectivity in some communities, but there will be valleys and rural communities that will not benefit significantly from that investment. So could something here be a complement to the connectivity offered by the metro, perhaps even as part of some integrated solution? And that's a long way off, and it's hard for me to get into this without second guessing or put in what I believe I would like to see happen. But we have had Transport for Wales attending that city region group. To the west of us, there's also the Valleys Task Force, and I attended a meeting of the Valleys Task Force yesterday because they were looking at transport, and the chair of that group just asked me to attend and talk about our work with the Cabinet Office. And there is a growing appetite out there amongst partners from all sectors to tackle this. We know it's going to be hard because if anyone sort of picked up the headlines, there was a piece on Radio 4 on Monday, and I think it was called the Transport Gap. but it was illustrating that if you live in London and the South East, public transport is subsidised by 3 times as much as it is in other parts of the UK. So for us to move towards that system is going to require some very different thinking. And that's what we're trying to do with that. And just also briefly, the other aspect of sustainable travel is sort of understanding, how could we potentially have things like more safer walking to school routes that would enable children to walk or cycle? What would that mean in terms of infrastructure costs? Could we make use of some of the capital funding opportunities that come to you as a transport group? And I've been talking to Christian Smith, the authority's transport officer, around that, and asked Christian to comment on a couple of pieces and said, look, any of this stuff, we're more than happy to come and talk to the transport group about. We'd be absolutely delighted to get that sort of diversity of views and the experience of that group. So active travel, and we're planning for the long term, but could it be different routes to schools where people can walk and actually embed the daily mile as part of that, which then pays back benefits in terms of some of the other challenges in the wellbeing plan around things like obesity and increasing levels of diabetes. Perhaps even aligned with, people are familiar with the concept of Boris bikes, and you go up in London. I think they've now actually banned them in China because there are so many cycle hire schemes, they're worried they're cluttering up the streets. But we don't have those in Monmouthshire. Could some routes also have those sort of cycles that you can just hire using your phone? Accessible cycles for people with disabilities. So maybe not everyone can walk with their child to school, but there might be some other mechanisms such as an electronic bike, an e-bike, or what's called electric bikes, that would enable them to do that. What would it take to make those available? So broad ambition at this stage, but there's been some very interesting research done at Cardiff and the Vale Health Board by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tom Porter. And we've been talking with Tom to build this up and get some sense. It's on a different scale, but what can we take from their research that might be applicable in Monmouthshire that would nudge people towards more active and sustainable travel options? But ultimately, I think our long-term aspiration should be one of building a fully integrated transport system where for our residents it's as simple as looking at the tube map in London. No matter who provides the bus, or the whole thing is linked up. And actually, if you live in Monmouth and you don't have a train station, there is an option to get to Abergavenny where that bus is aligned with the train. Now that's the metro. But then how can we get people into those local hubs, like Monmouth Town, where there might be a higher density bus service, from places like Lanishan or Devorden or whatever it might be.
That bus that's been cut,
yeah.
So they can't get to the towns.
Yeah.
Just coming back on what you were saying, Matt, brilliant response, really happy with that. I think I have the confidence you do recognise the importance of an integrated public transport system and have the confidence that you are inviting Cinderella to the ball. Yes, the solution-focused or problem-solving procurement is exciting and definitely is the way forward, trying to get others to solve our problems, and it is a problem in this area. I'd be interesting, you might not have the information here now, but to have sort of a timeline, because we do talk about all these ideas, but for me, I'd like to know, when the procurement's going back, when will the responses be due in, when will we be making our decision, when will we get the first pilot in place, so we can kind of monitor it along. And you've already suggested, I had a question here, is there a possibility for you to come to the transport group and update on this vision, on these ideas, just to update us and also to get some of the suggestions from the group, because there's a lot of residents attend the group as well from around the county. So that is really positive. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, if I just come back on the timescales. Well, we actually had a launch event of this yesterday at what's called Digital Tuesday. Some people may have seen it online. So it's sort of a South Wales tech community group. Right. It's pulled together by Innovation Point in Newport, and they often meet in Newport or the Celtic Manor. Yesterday they met in Cardiff, and colleagues from the Cabinet Office came down. Myself and Kath Fallon, who've co-led this bid in to the Tech Fund did a presentation to some technology firms and digital providers. The competition officially launches our challenge on the 16th of July, Monday the 16th. We're having a launch event at Caldecott Castle, details of which are on our website. We can circulate the link, but for anyone listening, it's monmouthshire.gov.uk/govtech_challenge, or just Google it. I'm sure it'll come up on it. Or other search engines are available, but won't get you the right results. So get the details of that. What we're trying to do with that is it's not closed to members of the community. We are interested in community groups that would be interested in working with challenge providers, but what we're really trying to do is get the digital firms there. It's the digital, because you have to be a firm or a constituted entity to go for this. You have to be someone who's an organisation that could receive £50,000, £500,000 in your bank account, but also have a route to market, because one of the reasons the Cabinet Office have funded this is to incentivise small or medium-sized technology firms to start solving public sector problems. One of the things we are interested in locally is co-production of solutions. So actually, if there were a firm to come up and say, we really want to do this, but what are the community groups in Monmouthshire that we could work with to help us understand this problem and get involved in some user design of solutions, that would be the ideal. So we wouldn't want that meeting on the 16th, all 100 tickets to go to community members, because then that would crowd out the space for the digital. But we are interested, the likes of, say, Bridges Community Centre that have a car share scheme and are actively in this space, could be a partner for one of the providers. But then in terms of the detail of timescales, it's quite short. The initial window is open for 6 weeks, so it's from the 16th of July to the 5th of September. We then will put in place an assessment panel for which we're supported by Innovate UK, who are a technology or an innovation body who are very experienced in the use of SBRI. We will have members on that panel, and we'll be looking to sort of find perhaps 1 or 2 community members that could be part of that panel and assessment process. And we think also probably, because this sits in the field of social justice and is being funded by Councillor Sarah Jones, she'll be invited onto the panel. But it'll be relatively small, 2 to 3 weeks to assess those initial ideas, at which stage we will offer the funding for the sort of the first stage of research and development to 5 firms. They then have, I don't have the precise timescales in front of me, but something, say it's a sort of 8 to 10 week period to sort of further work up that research and development phase. And of the £50,000, 25,000 has to be spent on research and development activities. This isn't just sort of throwing money at existing staff or resources. They have to be generating new knowledge and insight about what works. At the end of that, we have a sort of further panel or assessment, and we can select up to 2 of those 5 projects to fund. And at that stage, that's the sort of thing when we really expect those 2 to be more visible and to start to be working those up from almost sort of paper products and pieces of kit that they're working on in their back office, developers doing the things I don't pretend to understand with coding and software and so on, but also forming relationships. From January 2019, we'll be moving forward with, in an ideal scenario, 2 pilots, each of whom have been awarded £50,000 each. They will then have 9 months to basically turn that into a workable, viable solution. At that point, we make a decision whether to move forward with it. So that comes back to a decision, and if it requires further investment, clearly that would be a decision that was put before Cabinet or Council, depending on the sums and budgets involved. Now, the way this scheme works, I won't get too much into the detail. Effectively, the company still owns it. We're not buying it. We don't own their copyright or what they call their intellectual property, and that's their incentive. Because if they develop and can demonstrate in Monmouthshire a product that works at connecting lonely people and solving rural transport, then they have the right to commercialise that and sell it elsewhere. What we do as part of this whole sort of 9-month process, of this whole process, is a negotiation with them that as project sponsor, we secure discounted or royalty-free access to use that. Because without our involvement, the challenge wouldn't be there and they wouldn't be having the money in the first place. But of course, it depends on the project. Yeah, anything that has high staffing costs, they're not going to give us forevermore free of charge. So that's really that process of negotiation. But by the end of 2019, we'll have sort of tested out two pilots. They'll have been funded. So I'd anticipate then some sort of decision or debate happening within the council late 2019 or early 2020 as to whether this has solved our problem and whether we feel it's something you want to move forward with as members at scale.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that very detailed answer. Just taking forward this idea of our scrutiny role, and pertinent to what we've just been talking about, I guess, on page 15 in our papers, Mr. Gatehouse was talking to us about some of the project by partner organisations, and I was particularly interested in terms of the first objective around giving children the best possible start in life, their work that they're proposing there on physical inactivity and obesity. And at the top of page 15, creating active and safe communities. And I think this is a really nice example of interagency cooperation. And it ties in with something we were talking about in our pre-meeting. So in a moment, Councillor Treharne, I'll bring you in for that item we talked about, healthy food in supermarkets for children. But I noticed there that the Public Health Board, who are leading here, talking about refining their childhood obesity action plan and a coordinated approach to physical activity and obesity. And the final bullet points there talk about placing a greater focus and strategic approach on active travel and neighbourhood planning, and seeking solutions to rural transport and access to healthy food. So I think just the conversation we've had in this committee meeting this morning is pointing very clearly to ways in which we can, across organisations, collaborate, because if Public Health Wales are thinking about solutions to difficulties around public transport, you've just given us very detailed description, Mr. Gatehouse, of the way in which the local authority is thinking around there. It gives you confidence that it's going forward. But I think one of the problems for us as a scrutiny committee is that, as you said in your opening remarks, we're at a very early stage at the moment. We're up and running and people have put their projects on the table. But this particular project, this public health one on physical inactivity and obesity, I note that the timescale for that is yet to be specified. So I think one of the things we can send out from this morning's meeting is that we fully accept our responsibility to question organisations in the spirit of collaboration, and that we will be doing that. And it would certainly help us in that work if as soon as possible these projects can have timescales put to them. But Councillor Treharne, if I could bring you in, we were talking before the meeting started about the difficulties in supermarkets in particular of healthy food.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, my concerns are that as an authority we can stipulate guidelines to families for healthy eating and exercise and things like that, but healthy food isn't always cheap. And it's up to the supermarkets to bring the prices down. But how, as an authority, can we engage with the supermarkets to provide cheaper, healthy food? Councillor Baker has said that there are some fruits are cheaper than unhealthy foods and stuff like that. But overall, you ask families about healthy eating, and they say it's overpriced; they can't really afford it. How, as an authority, can we get supermarkets and businesses to engage in what's the word I'm looking for? Engage the families to bring healthy eating onto the table for their children, not just poorer families, but families across the social gap. And how do we go about changing culture and lifestyles for these people as well, without being too authoritative about it? Because obviously it's their families and their responsibilities, but we have a statutory duty to healthy lifestyles. So how do we go about that? Is, I guess, my question.
I'll have a go at starting, and Sharon, I know, has done some work with the obesity strategy and may come in as well. I've got some sort of personal thoughts and reflections on this. I think one of the things we have to be conscious of is actually, in many cases, the schools are doing a very good job in terms of educating young people around healthy eating choices. Now, I'm a father of two children, now aged 10 and 12, and they seem to spend more time than I'd imagined reading food labels and saying, you can't give us that, it's not very healthy, and rejecting the breakfast cereal options because it has too much sugar in. Now, I haven't taught them that. They may have got it off YouTube, but the reality is they're being taught these things in school. Now, obviously that has to be sort of backed up, as you rightly say, by work with supermarkets and others, and there we're talking about national markets. But I know it is the desire of the chief executive to see what we can do in terms of exploring more sustainable and healthy food options within Monmouthshire. We are a county with a sort of large agricultural sector, bordered by Herefordshire in similar circumstances, and it shouldn't be beyond our capabilities to pull together and work and enhance supply chains. Now, I appreciate I'm saying something there that's making something that's incredibly complex, and working with businesses overly simple. But I think there are solutions that could be explored, and they're not necessarily within my gift or even any of our gifts. But you see the sorts of things which are happening now where supermarkets and shops have these Amazon lockers. So you sometimes go to a shop and you get a code and you can unlock what you've ordered online. I know they're very common in sort of large urban areas and cities, but they need internet connectivity. Now, all of our village halls have had, most of them had an investment in pretty good broadband. What if there were sort of refrigerated food lockers in those village halls, where local farmers and growers that don't operate at enough scale to go around and do house-to-house deliveries like Amazon may do, could actually drop in a local locker? So you could order your locally grown healthy produce from a local supplier who could then drop locally. There could even be a business opportunity for a local young person to redistribute that from the lockers and do it in multiple sections. Now, that's only one thought, and it may or may not be feasible. But I think what we're trying to do with this is create a sense of what could be possible, and look at those ideas that are happening elsewhere, and how could we take elements of that and apply it in Monmouthshire to work within our context and with our supply chains. And then you couple that with things like the incredible edible movement that I know our colleague Alison Howard has been very successful, or put a lot of energy into happening in Monmouthshire, using patches of underused public land and trying to make it easier for communities to take on board that and do some local sort of growing of sustainable food. Now, it's very hard to grow enough food to live on. We know that, and I've tried to grow carrots in my garden, and quite frankly, it never works, and if we would depend on those, we would be very, very hungry. But actually, it is an important step, because the children enjoy eating those stunted, slightly skewed carrots far more than they enjoy eating the perfectly formed ones that we get from the supermarket, because they've grown it, they've created it. They love picking the peas. And actually, the more people are involved in the production of anything, be it healthy food, be it growing, the more it's likely that they will grow up building that into their lifestyle choices and understanding healthy food. So clearly, Public Health Wales are taking this forward. There is work on obesity. And really, right now, they're still at that scale of gathering this sense of ambition. But I know when I spoke to Gemma at Public Health Wales, Gemma Burrows is one of our colleagues there. We connected on the one I was talking about with active travel and this sort of obesity one. And we said, well, if we had active travel routes to school, what would be on the verges? You know, actually, could you have sort of growing pits where on their way home, children stop and there's a patch that they can dig up and they can grow, and there could be people in the local community that would help them, which could be part of intergenerational work. So we're not talking things that will happen overnight, but what we are talking about is what are the ideas that could create a very different and healthier future for those children now, so they grow up with those behaviours. So not an easy one, but it just in terms of what is feasible. I know the chief exec at the moment is having some conversations exploring the potential of the feasibility of a local and more sustainable supply chain, and certainly we're aware that there are probably businesses in the local vicinity, you know, some very highly rated hotel and food sectors that I imagine would be very interested in the provenance of sustainably grown local produce, and off the back of that, what are the opportunities for local schools and young children to get involved?
Thank you very much for that. Interestingly, I was reading about a village in Herefordshire. You mentioned many similarities between Monmouthshire and Herefordshire, where a food store has been set up for local food producers that's actually based at the back of the village church. It's just a lock-up thing, and villagers have got a key and they pay for the food that they take. And I thought, well, that's an absolutely brilliant idea, because there is obviously not the cost of transporting food hundreds of miles and having processed this and that. And I thought that was great, and maybe something that could be looked at by Monmouthshire. Okay, have we got any further comments or questions on that agenda item? I think Councillor Blakeborough.
I haven't. I'm just aware that we were sent a few questions. At what point? Fab, right.
Before we leave this actual report, there are three recommendations which are on page 11 there. They're pretty general because, as Mr. Gatehouse said, we're at very, very early days. But I think we could accept those recommendations, but perhaps just add slightly to them to say that we do look forward to developing a scrutiny role and working in collaboration by inviting representatives of the different agencies to appear before us to talk about their projects. Councillor Treharne.
Thank you. Sorry, just going back to the competition that's been opened up. Would we get a chance to scrutinise the companies with their R&D research or anything like that at all?
That's a good point, and one I'm not sure I have the answer to yet. I think. Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about to scrutinise the individual companies. I'm not sure, because it's not, as it says, it's not a PSB project, and in terms of, I'm just trying to think, because obviously what we're doing effectively is putting in place a panel which would have representatives of the authority on it. But I think that's something I have to consider and come back to you on. I think certainly once we're in the phase of the two companies, we would certainly be looking for a way for them to talk to members. You know, again, we wouldn't have the powers if they weren't comfortable doing it, and we could be talking to an IT company of two people that's based in Edinburgh. You know, we couldn't compel them to come and attend scrutiny. But I think one of the things we are very interested in is working with companies that want to come in and understand Monmouthshire and talk with councillors and talk with people. So actually, through that selection process, we are looking to identify people that, even though we may not necessarily have with them the formal mechanism of scrutiny, there will be opportunities for you as members to engage in the shaping and development of those pieces of work. But there certainly will be opportunities for that project as a whole to be scrutinised. It may just not be feasible to bring forward each one of the companies for an individual scrutiny session. But I'll have a little look at that, because this is new to us, and it's also new to the Cabinet Office. And the reality is, I mean, there are only, I think, of all the projects that have come forward, I mean, only 2 have been from local authorities. We've seen bodies like the Ministry of Justice and DEFRA with the other successful projects. So it's probably a question that hasn't been asked before, to be honest, and one that needs a little further research to give you a good answer.
Okay. Just to clarify, the competition is open to nationwide, is it, or not just Monmouthshire companies?
No, that's right. It's nationwide. It's UK government. It's UK government funding. One of the things we've sort of said to the Cabinet Office, and we'll say to individual firms, is we will make available to them office space should they wish to relocate. So if they're from outside the area and wish to sort of locate here or have desk space here, clearly we have vacant desks at Innovation. Sorry? Yeah, there's great opportunities, because you're absolutely right, there are some local companies, and there are a lot of, I think we have the fastest growing tech sector outside of London within Southeast Wales. So, our ideal, if you could paint an ideal, it is someone that sees a possibility through the various things we're doing in Monmouthshire, like the work on the 5G test bed, the Internet of Things Accelerator, which is at Innovation Point, that I can't pretend to even begin to understand, but it sounds very clever and it's impressive that we're doing it. We are starting to establish some real technology credentials, and this is another signal to technology companies to say, look, actually, Monmouthshire is quite an interesting place to come and do business. So maybe this round, we might get 2, 3, 4 applications from local firms. Next time we're in this space, we've raised that flag. We've said, technology companies, come work in Monmouthshire. We're interested in testing out new ideas that can make things better for our local communities. And at the same time, ideally we want to see those technology jobs, those well-paid, higher-skilled jobs. It would be great to have them in our local communities, so that those younger people that have to move away to Bristol or London to pursue their careers actually think, no, Monmouthshire is a place where I can do this. There are markets and opportunities here. There are like-minded individuals I can network with. So, yes, it's the rural transport solution, but in answer to your point, that broader economic development potential that you're looking for there's real scope for us through this and other projects to position Monmouthshire as a place to be for technology.
If I can just come back on that, excellent broadband would be very beneficial as well, because if businesses are based in Monmouthshire, then if you've got a good internet connection, you don't need to travel for your meetings. You can do it via Skype all around the world, so you can be based in Monmouthshire, not leave Monmouthshire, and conduct all your business. So it would be a good idea to make sure that we do get a digitally connected county, amongst other things as well.
Councillor Blakeborough.
Just on the broadband internet thing, because that's been the bane of my life since being elected. And what is really frustrating and disappointing is in the first phase of the rollout from the Welsh Government money, we were last. And so we were desperate to ask if we could be at least in the first 3 on the second phase, but no, we're not. So I think we're sort of scrabbling around for other solutions until we can get back on that phase. But it's just short-sighted of the Welsh Government. They just keep putting us at the back of the queue for this when we're meant to be leading the way in terms of digital connectivity. So, that's my rant of frustration.
I think we can certainly note your rant and your concerns, and perhaps if we can add to the recommendations then that we'd like some clarity from officers about how we can further develop our scrutiny role where it's to do with commercial organisations. So thanks for raising that. And finally, I think we would also like to add from our discussion this morning that we'd like some clarity about timescales, which would help us to carry out our work more effectively. So I think it's congratulations on getting up and running, on getting some very worthwhile projects in place, but it will make our life easier if there is greater clarity. And if you could tell colleagues on the PSB that we look forward across agencies to welcoming people here to ask them questions about how the whole thing is progressing. But as Councillor Blakeburgh said, while we've got you in front of us there, Mr Gatehouse, I believe that one of our councillor colleagues, Councillor Alan Davis, has sent in some questions around the Public Service Board and moving the legislation forward. This seems an opportune moment for you to address those questions, if you could.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just searching through for the questions. So broadly, for the benefit of the many people watching the live stream, and we know there are some because they emailed the response in or messaged the response into Hazel on the earlier question on sample size. So we do have a watching and connected audience. So I think one of the things that Councillor Alan Davis had mentioned in correspondence, and we thought these would be appropriate, broader questions it was worth answering for the committee, as well as in my emailed response to Councillor Davis, was in the sense that vision. What's the vision for the PSB? So if I just sort of run through these and talk more broadly, and Rich, Hazel or Sharon may also come in. So what's our vision? What are the measures of activity? What are the time scales for implementation? And what's the data that we will be using to continuously evaluate? So I think all of those are really good scrutiny questions. And I guess the sorts of questions that you're all used to asking of traditional local authority services. They're much harder to answer in terms of the context of the sorts of issues we're talking about at a public service board because of the complexity. But hopefully what you will have seen in the report before you today, at least in its early form, and something which Councillor Davis didn't have the benefit of when asking these questions, was the emerging vision for each of these steps, what we think it could look like. And they're of differing depth and quality. We recognise that at this stage. They're all continuously being worked on. But those steps, if people look at the report, should give a sense of where we think we could get to on these projects and what the ambition would be. Yeah, and also, as you'll see, the timescales. So we've described, and also I can't run through and wouldn't do justice to all 19 projects, but to draw on the example we've just given around digital solutions to rural transport, where these things are at a more advanced stage, we have some clear timescales in place. Others are far more aspirational, still very much at the exploration stage. So the impact of adverse childhood experiences, the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner, Sophie Howe, who came to one of our previous meetings, they have coordinated, and I believe, are they hosting an ACES hub? Pulling together experts to give all of this insight, which will then be cascaded out to the individual public service boards and partners to enable them to act. So right now, we don't have clarity on exactly what we will be doing and when, because there's a lot of further work being undertaken. This is all relatively new research from Public Health Wales on adverse childhood experiences. So very early stages. So each of these is slightly different, and over time we will be bringing to you more detail as these get shaped up to answer that question. In terms of measurement, at a very broad level, within our wellbeing plan, we set out, how many was it, about 40 or so measures in the national set? 46 measures that were set under the wellbeing plan. Now, sometimes they're at quite a large and societal level. And they're things which will be measured by all 19 of the public service boards in Wales. And they are, I haven't got them in front of me, I'll struggle to recall now. But in the area of things like CO2 emissions per head of population, we're looking at that sort of level of measurement for some of these. Others are drawn from National Survey for Wales questions, which are, how connected do you feel in your local community? They'll be dogged by similar issues, as we discussed earlier, because your sample size will be sort of 800 to 1,000 people across Monmouthshire. So we have that set of 46 broad measures alongside the well-being index and pulse that Richard spoke about earlier. So that will broadly sense whether we're moving in the right direction. But then for each of these projects, we will need, as they're developed, some fairly specific measures and milestones that track that particular project. Because, you know, one of the things we might see, say, from the Transport One is a reduction in missed hospital appointments at Neville Hall or the Royal Gwent, because people who currently can't get to their hospital appointment because of a lack of transport are missing less appointments. So obviously, you know, that's quite a big data set we need to work with health colleagues, and that's just an idea. But for each of these projects, we'll need to identify that handful of baskets of measures that says, as long as those broader sense of, as well as the broader sense of well-being, we'll be able to measure at a community level, this specific project is having a particular a particular outcome for a targeted group of individuals. So we're not yet in a position to say exactly what those are, and sometimes they'll be quite complex, because if you look at something like transport, you might actually see a reduction in conventional passenger transport numbers if, you know, in terms of scheduled services, if you had a different or more bespoke dial-a ride or grassroots type service in place. So what you might find is that one of your conventional measures may move in one direction while something new moves in another, and it's not always that hard to it's not always easy to see what those impacts are. But rest assured, you know, Rich, Hazel, Sharon and her team will all be working as these projects are developed to put in place a robust measurement framework around these, so that we can assess progress. And where it isn't measured by numbers, we will have those milestones, so you can say, right, we can't tell you what percentage that's shifted by, but actually we've hit these 3 milestones, and in hitting these 3 milestones, we're fairly confident that this is now in place. So I appreciate it's not an answer that comes with pounds, shillings, pence or percentages attached to it at the moment. But it does give you that sense that we are looking for this, but also they're complex things, and they're not going to be easily measurable or tracked in the short term.
Okay, thanks very much for that. If we can go back to our formal agenda then. Agenda item 8, which is on page 27 in the agenda, is the minutes of the last PSB meeting. And I know the first page there on page 27 is a list of attendees and apologies. And clearly we are talking here about an organisation of some considerable clout pulling together across agencies very important people. I wonder if from the chair I could make a comment on the number of people who sent apologies but did not send a deputy to speak on their behalf, which from the attendees it clearly is possible to send someone as a representative if you're not able to get to the meeting yourself. And so to see virtually 50% of people sending apologies but not a deputy, I think is a shame. And if we could record that, please, I would be grateful. But are there any comments on those minutes, which gives us a clear picture, I think, of what happened at that last meeting? Okay, so we just note those minutes and accept them. Thank you, colleagues. The final item then is simply to note the date and time of our next meeting, which is the 10th of October, and it will be at 10 a.m., I assume, unless you hear to the contrary. Colleagues and officers, thank you all very much for your attendance this morning.